Welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. I'm Skift's editor-in-chief, Sarah Kopit, joined, as always, by Skift's head of research, Seth Borko. Hey, Seth, how you doing?
Good. How's everyone doing?
Today, we are going to dive into the high-stakes world of airline loyalty programs. It is a multi-billion-dollar cash cow that is transforming the way carriers make money and engage with travelers. But from frustrated frequent flyers to Washington's regulatory spotlight, loyalty programs are increasingly under fire. Are these programs still worth it for consumers, or are airlines prioritizing profits over perks? So to unpack all of this business and backlash and what it means for the future of travel, we are joined today by Skift's very own airline reporter, Meghna Maharishi. Hey, Meghna, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So a quick reminder, before we get started, send any questions or comments that you have for us to podcasts@skift.com. And please don't forget to follow, subscribe, or like this podcast wherever it is that you're listening or watching. And if you enjoy the show, please rate us 5 stars. It allows us to spread the word about the Skift Travel Podcast. All right. So to begin, I wanted to open it up to like a fun little roundtable discussion about our own personal airline miles or redemption stories or plans. Seth, we were talking about this earlier. I feel like you may have a story to share.
Yeah, well, I was planning a big trip this year and I was very excited, and I decided I would start reading, all of these points publications and become a points expert. And then I was going to book a trip to Japan, and everyone said you can do all this amazing stuff. And it was a real nightmare to book. I have to tell you, it was almost like a full-time job. And I did get my flight eventually, but it was not the luxurious, free first class experience I thought it would be. I had to connect in Toronto and fly, and it was still a great flight and it was free. So that counts, but I think it's foreshadowing for what's to come. But I really got into it. It was fun in its own weird way, though, as hard as it was. What about you, Meghna? Do you ever fly on points or miles?
No, I've actually always been really bad with it. I don't know, because I really only started flying a lot 2 years ago, and I'm always at least because I fly the most with United, I'm always 1 or 2 trips off from reaching the next tier, and then I never am able to pull it off. I guess one frustrating thing though was this summer when I was trying to book flights to Europe. I mean, this was partly my fault because it was extremely last minute, but I was looking at how much it would cost on Delta to go to Italy, and it was 150,000 miles for an economy ticket, and I was like, oh my god, it's not any better. I was like, I'll just spend the money.
What about you, Sarah?
Yeah, so when I was in college back in the late 90s, I think there must have been a booth for an American Airlines credit card, which I signed up for. And to this day, I'm tied to American Airlines, just because I've had that credit card for it's probably the thing in college that I did that probably affects my life the most, the most now in 2024, right? Is this decision to, I don't know, I probably got a free t-shirt or something. So I have this credit card. I'm an American Airlines flyer, but I don't know, I don't use the points very much. I use the miles. Generally, it's if I have to go to a funeral or something that was last minute, I didn't plan on doing it. It's it's actually generally not for vacation.
Yeah. It's like an emergency fund. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. When you don't want to spend the money necessarily, but it's, it's something that you have to do. So I am not a very good points user. I find it too confusing. And that's rich, right? For us to say that.
Yeah. Well, I think it is rich for us to say it. You'd be surprised, calling up the airline saying, don't you know who Skift is? Doesn't get as far as our viewers might think it does, by the way. Just a heads up. But look, let's jump into the business of this conversation. We're telling these stories about points, miles, loyalties, these loyalty programs, whether they're points programs, miles programs, whatever programs, they are incredibly, incredibly lucrative. They make, no exaggeration, billions, tens of billions of dollars. They're often described as the crown jewels of the airline themselves. Some people say that, really airlines are just loyalty programs that, happen to own a couple airplanes as well. But, as we sort of heard some of our stories, there are great stories and there are some horror stories or frustrations or disappointments or misalignments, perhaps might be the right word. So let's jump into it, Magna. How do you reconcile the huge profitability of these programs with what seems to be a sense of some, let's call it maybe dissatisfaction. I don't know if that's too strong a word. You correct me if it is, but maybe let's call it dissatisfaction, as well as increased costs and challenges to have status and to have redemptions. If it's getting more hard, how is it still so profitable? What's happening there?
What I've noticed is that a lot of these airlines, they do have a base of people where they are able to pull off like raising the requirements and it won't affect that base. And I think one of the best examples of that is at Delta's Investor Day, is that they were saying that they've been increasing the number of first class seats that are available to buy with cash instead of an upgrade. And the people who would mostly be getting an upgrade for that are the ones who have status or have the miles to do that. But they're finding that people are willing to spend a lot of money on a first class seat instead of trying to upgrade to one. So now it's like 12% of their seats are available for upgrades and the rest are all bought with cash. And I think it just goes to show that at least the industry since 2022, it has just done really well because they've been able to retain a lot of these wealthier travelers. I do think there's also another issue in the way that these programs have been advertised, which was something that a lot of people I spoke to said that that's something that airlines need to revisit, because I think a lot of the conventional wisdom with a loyalty program is like, oh, like you sign up, it's free, and then if you fly enough, like you can probably redeem them for maybe a business class flight here and there. But if you're not like flying like at least like 10, 20 times a year, like you're not going to be able to do that. Even for someone like myself, like I've typically been flying 5 to 6 times a year, which is above average compared to most people. I definitely do not earn enough miles or enough with my credit card spending to be able to do that. So it's like very clear that these programs just work for a certain type of person who's either like really committed to it, or maybe they're a business traveler and they're flying every week for work.
I fly a lot now, which is probably not a surprise, working at a travel media publication. And I have only gotten upgraded once, and it was to a flight to Cancun, which totally makes sense now that I think about it, because there aren't too many people flying business to Cancun. So there were open seats. So we got one, which was great. But I will say that I don't care about flying business class to Cancun on my way to vacation. I'm just like happy to be sitting in the back row of economy on my way to Cancun. I have never been upgraded on a business trip where it might be like highly beneficial to me, like emotionally, physically, whatever, to get that upgrade. It's just, it has never once been the case. So I wholeheartedly feel exactly what you said, Megda. Like, and I'm not willing to put in the time. I don't know. It's not even gaming the system. It's learning the system, I guess, is what it would be.
I might use the word game in the system.
Yeah, well, the government does as well, I think, or at least that's part of what the inference was into all those investigations. So going back to this, like, let's just talk about the regular person, which I think is kind of what we're talking about. We fly for business occasionally, we fly for leisure occasionally. What's the perception like between regular flyers, members of public, and these like points enthusiasts, the people that probably make the YouTube videos and the ones who are out there, basically earning their living and flying around the world, business and first class for free? Do you see a big discrepancy in like the value proposition there?
Yeah. So, I mean, for example, if you go online and you go on Reddit or something and you see an average traveler asking, like, oh, is it worth it for me to sign up for Delta Sky Miles? You're going to get a ton of responses from people saying that, no, it's not worth it. You have to spend so much money to get status. They keep on increasing their status requirements. It's just really not worth it. But if you talk to a points and miles enthusiast, they look at these programs very differently. They look at miles as kind of like a piggy bank. So it's like a savings account, and you can use them when you really need them, or you're just accruing them over time, but you shouldn't necessarily expect to get 50,000 miles and then move on to the next tier within your first year of signing up for a program if you're not flying very frequently.
It's like currency. It's like money.
Yeah.
Well,
Isn't it? Isn't
It's
it?
like
Like
it's like
in that,
money with one big exception.
yes, exactly.
Well, it's like money with one big exception, which is that, well, I mean, you can argue about inflation, but the U.S. government doesn't devalue the dollar anywhere near as much as an airline. You're at the whims of your currency being devalued by a brand new CEO at the whims of the shareholders. I mean, I think that that's the thing. Like, I talk to people. People ask me. They think I'm a frequent flyer mile expert. I'm certainly not. They say, "Oh, you work in travel," but my advice is always with points is like, spend them. Don't hold on to them, because if you hold on to them, like, you're at risk of getting majorly devalued. How? I mean, do airlines think a lot about the trust that they break when they devalue their miles, or is it something they just need to do, or like how does the devaluation conversation happen on the airline side of things, Megna?
It seems like it's more so something that they just need to do. And it's sort of in the way that they see it, that they need to raise spending requirements in order to keep up with demand, in order to make sure that they're delivering the service that they can deliver to those elite status members and not dilute it by having too many people there. They see it as more of a business need. I think the issue with devaluations is that they happen so frequently and so sporadically that it can be really hard to keep track of, because one quarter and they might be worth less, and then another quarter they might be worth a lot more. So it kind of just like bounces back and forth.
Do you think that, can I ask? Do you think, are they doing that on purpose to get rid of the gamers? Like you, because like one of the things you said at the very beginning was that there's this hardcore elite first class flyers, and they're willing to pay cash for a first class ticket, and they probably work for a big bank or consulting company, and they spend a lot of money, and their experience is being diluted by all of the points YouTubers who are taking those upgrades from them. Are they trying to get rid of those hanger-ons? Is that like part of the strategy? Does that make sense
I
for the
don't
question I'm asking?
Yeah, no, I don't entirely think that's what they're aiming to do exactly. I think it's just more sort of like a supply and demand calculation they make. And also, like, this is not something that they advertise themselves. The people who are keeping track of this are the points and miles nerds who calculate how much 1 mile is worth into cents. And then they're the ones who are tracking how that value changes over time. So I think it's just mostly done to balance that out. But I will say that there definitely has been some complaints that that has been happening more often.
So let's talk about regulation and the government. So under the Biden administration, there was some DOT and CFPB scrutiny on these loyalty programs. And, they were saying that some of these changes may benefit consumers. Fine. Like, that's their job. But let's talk about the big elephant in the room here. We've got a new administration coming in just over a month, one that is promising to kind of pull back the regulation on airlines. What's going to happen to loyalty programs in these next, like, very early days of the Trump administration 2.0? Any thoughts?
So the DOT still hasn't come out with the findings of their investigation into these programs. I'm not sure if they'll just do that before January. A lot of people that I was talking to were saying that they were expecting the DOT to kind of have airlines put more disclosures to their programs and put more disclosures to their advertising, just because they felt like the advertising had not been very honest. Also, because a lot of people were just against the government touching these programs, regardless of administration. However, I think the feeling is that when Trump comes back, a lot of these initiatives are probably going to be killed. They're probably going to die down. The only problem that makes it hard to tell for sure if they will die down is that a lot of these airline issues, compared to other political issues, have bipartisan support in Congress. With junk fees, for example, you have some of the most right wing Republicans even supporting regulations to mandate airlines to disclose those. So it's hard to see like what direction he goes in, just because from what we've seen so far, it seems as if he's trying to balance those populist, loyalist interests that he has, and then also those Wall Street business interests too. So we'll see where it goes. But I think like the safe bet is that the investigation, if they don't come out with their findings before January 20th, will probably die down.
Do you know, Megna, if I know you're not a credit card reporter, obviously. Do you know if there's any changes on how the administration might look into credit cards and credit card fees? Because I think a lot of those do feed these programs. There might be some knock-on effects.
Yeah, so there was some talk about the Trump administration being interested in capping credit card fees, which was something that Congress has just generally been interested in reining in these credit card companies. They did decline to vote on the Credit Card Competition Act, but they also were during the hearing basically mandating the executives at Visa and MasterCard to do something before Congress has to step in. So, like, that's highly possible just because capping those credit card fees is just something that has a lot of support across the spectrum. So, that would be possible. I mean, like, the airline industry has been in a lobbying campaign for the past almost like 2 years trying to stop Congress from passing that credit card bill. Now they're also trying to stop Congress from trying to put forth a bill that would put more regulations on their loyalty programs too, partly because beyond the loyalty program alone, the credit cards are what is delivering most of the money, and a lot of the revenues that they make are coming from credit card spend. So it kind of goes a little bit against their own interests.
That's such a funny like ripple effect, second, third order of like high credit card fees pay for credit card spend, which pays for miles, which pay for airline profits. Therefore, airlines lobby against credit card. Like it's such a funny thing. Can I ask you? I mean, so we got these credit card programs. I do want to talk to you more about them. Can I ask you about outside the credit card programs? I mean, why are these programs so sticky? Why do people care so much about either credit card points or airline miles? Like, what is it about the psychology of this that even though there's regulation and Senate hearings and Congress hearings and all sorts of stuff, that people still love their miles and that the airlines are still so committed to building these kind of programs? What's happening here?
I think people love to travel, and the promise of miles kind of gives off this idea that if you spend enough money with them and you show that they're loyal, and then they give you enough miles in return, you can maybe redeem them for a business or a first class flight you may have never been able to pay for in the first place, because typically if you can find a good redemption, that's going to cost significantly less in cash, like when you convert the miles to cash compared to if you just paid with plain cash.
Everybody loves the perception of a deal, right? Perception being the key word there. So I think that's a great place to take a break. We will see you all on the other side. All right, welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. We are talking about all things airline loyalty. So, Meghna, is the US just bad at this? There are many US-based travelers who are actually going to international loyalty programs. Like I've been hearing like Turkish's Miles and Smiles, for example. I have a better chance of getting that, beloved upgrade if I do that. What are the US airlines either learning from their international counterparts, or why are the international airlines, achieving what the American ones can't seem to do right now?
So, yeah, it has been becoming a little bit more popular with some travelers to look for redemptions on international programs because the values are lower than what you might find on American, Delta, or United. However, it doesn't seem as if any of the American carriers are really worried about that. When I spoke to United's head of Mileage Plus, he was saying that it's not really a concern because at the end of the day, Mileage Plus has just certain perks that a lot of these other international programs don't have. So you might be able to redeem like maybe, I don't know, 50,000 miles for a business class seat with Lufthansa or something. That would be a good deal. But then maybe there could be change or cancellation fees involved, whereas Mileage Plus doesn't have that, for example. So that's been something that they're not too worried about. I think it's also just a really small subset of travelers, and those are the people who are just generally very experienced with this whole game. So they just know what to look for and they know how to get around that. I mean, if you're an average traveler, I don't think it's going to be that easy to pull off necessarily.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk, because we've danced around the topic of credit cards. I want to ask you directly about them because at the very top of this podcast, I said I flew to Tokyo by way of Toronto, and that's because I used my Amex miles and I did an Aeroplan, the Air Canada redemption thing, and so I had to route through Toronto. So let's talk about that. I know that when we talk about these programs being profitable, the reality is most of that money is coming from credit card companies. What is the role of the credit cards here, and how is that evolving?
The way the model works is that airlines will sell a certain number of miles to a bank, and the bank will kind of dole those out, and they'll collect the fees through the credit card signups and the sales and everything. And then at the end of the quarter, or they are paying back the airline for all of that. That's the remuneration they're getting from the credit card company. And in the past couple decades or so, that's been growing, and it's just been becoming a very profitable part of an airline's business. I think Delta's American Express credit card, I believe one time Ed Bastian said the spending on that accounts for 1% of the national GDP. So it's just been very popular. And I think the way that it's shaping these loyalty programs is that now airlines are tying a lot more perks to these credit cards. So it's going to incentivize someone to sign up for that credit card if they want to get a free checked in baggage, or they want to get lounge access and not have to pay for that separately.
That's the biggest benefit that I have ever seen out of my like any status that I have is a free bag.
Ooh.
That's it. That because they're so expensive, right? And so if you can manage to get the free bag, on the lowest tier of through all the various places that you typically fly, I think that's a pretty good deal.
I want to ask you, Megan, about on this credit card, and I kind of want your opinion here, and I'm kind of asking you to go a little bit off the cuff, so I apologize. But I know that it's obviously good for them in terms of cash flow, but do you think that this is good for the airlines in the long term? Is this like a one-time hit? Like, are they high off of all of this cash flow, and are they damaging their long-term loyalty with their customers? Like, I might argue, devil's advocate here, that United is really flying a lot of planes to help build loyalty for Chase credit cards. Like, they are putting a lot of money into building loyal customers for Chase, not loyal customers for United. Like, do you think that in the long run that these partnerships might be harmful, or if not harmful, at least neutral?
So I think it's one of those things where it's good for them until it's not. I think one of the reasons these programs are doing so well is because there is so much demand for premium travel, so much demand for international travel. They're having a lot of high spend travelers making up the majority of their sales right now. And that's why it's working so well. And a lot of that is also just a reflection of the state of the economy right now. So I think if there was some big economic shock to happen and then things changed drastically, then I don't think they'd be seeing the same returns on those credit cards. And I think also a lot of people would be reevaluating then if it's even worth signing up for those credit cards right now, in this moment, if that was the case. So there's that. And I do think I get what you're saying. Yeah, to a certain extent, you are basically building up loyalty with Chase or American Express, especially because they offer these other perks. But I do think it still does help the airline to an extent. I feel like the Delta American Express card, for example, I feel like they have a very devoted base of people that are, devoted to American Express and Delta. I guess the closest example I can think of is my boyfriend's mom. I know she has the Delta SkyMiles American Express card, and she pretty much is only flying Delta most of the time because she's getting a lot out of it with that credit card.
And her free check bag.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the airlines are saying that the overcrowding in the elite status tiers is why they are raising these thresholds and kind of changing the rules on their customers. Do you think this is really a capacity problem, or is it basically a calculated strategy to maximize cash revenue from its premium travelers? Essentially, have these programs become victims of their own success, so to speak? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think what there has happened, at least with the consumer perception, is in 2020, a lot of these airlines really significantly lowered their status requirements, and that allowed a lot of people to earn status. They got lounge access. They liked how that felt, but then those lounges became really crowded. The level of service that they gave, it became too diluted, and then you begin questioning if it's even worth it because there are just so many people. I mean, even today, if you were to walk into a Delta lounge at JFK, it's probably very crowded. You'd be shocked at the number of people who are buying first class or business class tickets, for example. So that is definitely an issue, and it has been an issue since the pandemic when they really lowered those requirements. I think now in raising the requirements, they're trying to kind of go back to those pre-pandemic norms. They're
Yeah.
just trying to weed out those people because it is creating complaints for them that is leading to overcrowded lounges. A lot of people are unhappy. So there is definitely like a rationale for needing to do that right now. I think it's just that it's very jarring for a lot of people to go from, oh, it's so easy for me to earn status on Delta and I can go to the lounge, to like, oh my God, now I have to spend so much money to keep this up. It's not worth it.
I hardly ever go. It depends upon the airport, but I don't, even if I could, I hardly ever go to the lounges anymore because a lot of the airports that I'm flying out of, like I'm very lucky or into, they're so nice. Like LaGuardia, for example, is so nice. The Harvey Milk Terminal at SFO is so nice. They've got great restaurants, great places to sit. The lounge, it's like overrun, busy, and like it's almost better to be out in the terminal these days, which that's neither here nor there. Just an observation from me.
I know it's neither here nor there, but I want to second this, that I've gotten some fights with my partner where she like wants to go to the lounge. I'm like, we don't need to eat, buffet tray rice pilaf. Let's go get a Shake Shack and let's sit down and let's watch the planes take off or whatever, hang out. Like I'm with you that, like, especially as they get more crowded, especially if there's like a 20-minute wait to get into a whatever lounge. It's like, it does depend on the airport for sure.
Because of that, I think that's why we're starting to see more competition in the lounge space for who can produce the nicest lounge that really goes above and beyond. The best example of that is the Delta One lounges that are beginning to open up all over the country. They opened their first one at JFK a few months ago, and it's not something you would expect from an American airline, like the level of service that they give. Like the staff is super attentive to you. They have a full service restaurant. It's a Danny Meyer restaurant. They have a mini spa. They will do your dry cleaning. You can take a shower there. You can also basically take an elevator all the way up to your gate, so you don't really have to walk through the airport to it. It has all these perks, and I think something like that, like I could understand why that would be worth it compared to just like sitting in an airport terminal. But because these airports are now, they're investing so much money into creating a better customer experience, I think airlines are also now investing a lot into these lounges because I think they know that they need to give something that does go above and beyond. So there's that. I mean, even like in LaGuardia at one point, I feel like there was a new lounge opening every other month, and it was almost like a contest for who has the best lounge. It was like there was the American Lounge and the United Lounge, then the Amex Lounge, and then the Chase one. And it was like, oh, this United Lounge is great. This American Lounge is even better. This Amex Lounge is the best one. No, this Chase Sapphire one is the best one. And it's like kind of like one-upping each other, basically.
I have to say two things. First, you said there's a Danny Meyer restaurant in the lounge. I will point out Shake Shack is technically a Danny Meyer restaurant.
Yes, that is
so
true.
You can get that in with for the plebes. What do you think's going to happen in like 5 to 10 years when these lounges have not, like, I wonder if like in 10 years we're going to come back and LaGuardia is going to have all this empty retail space.
I don't think so, because I mean I've been to, at least from just personal experience, like I have been to the American Airlines Lounge in LaGuardia, and it's pretty all right. I feel like they still get like a decent number of, they still have a decent bit of traffic there, but then also the airport itself is so crowded. I think the thing about LaGuardia is that they invested so much into reinventing itself, and they've put like so many good restaurants and like coffee shops there. So I don't think that's going to happen, because like every time I'm at LaGuardia, like it's just crowded in general. I think people, when they fly, at least in the New York area, I think now they actually want to go to LaGuardia, which is maybe not something people had felt before.
It's definitely not
Definitely
something that
not.
people felt before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely not.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you about, I'm just on this topic, and this is the whole point of your article, is about these changing rules and the lack of clarity. And we talk about these lounge, and we're trying to push some people out of the lounges, and it's to treat some people better, and some points programs or changes. Do you think airlines need to worry about overall just blowback from this trust and transparency? Like, how important is like a transparency to a loyalty program? I know, like, if I want to book loyalty, there's all these websites, these like third-party websites that will scrape all these different points redemption. It's incredibly lack of transparency. The rewards are kind of hard to understand sometimes. Like, are these systems set up to discourage clarity? And do you think there could be any blowback from that? Or is that just the nature of a complex ecosystem?
Yeah, those miles, they change like so frequently compared
Yeah,
to if you're buying
totally.
with cash. Like it's like if you see a good redemption at one point, if you look 10 minutes later, it'll be gone. So yeah, it is definitely not transparent, and that has been a source of frustration for customers, and I think also for regulators in Washington too. Just generally, the way airlines go about their pricing, whether it is for cash or miles, just has not been transparent, and they're still not ready to explain the rationale behind it. I mean, even at this Senate junk fee hearing recently, all these senators were getting really frustrated that none of the executives would say like what goes into determining how much they charge for a seat or a bag. So yeah, there's that. And I think it's probably going to stay that way unless the government mandates them to disclose that or to be more transparent about it. It'll probably stay that way. I think it is just what keeps them competitive. And I think it also just keeps people like on their toes if you're really looking for a deal. So there's that. And I think like if there was really a time for the trust or transparency to erode, I think it would have been when Delta made those really controversial changes to their program in 2023. I mean, I haven't been covering this beat for that long, but I had never seen so much blowback or so much discussion online, like basically everywhere, about those changes and about how much money it would cost to get to the next tier of status. They were so poorly received. And I mean, Delta did not really give much of an explanation for the rationale, although it seemed pretty clear that they wanted to weed out the people who were getting status very easily during the pandemic, who wouldn't be able to get status in a pre-pandemic environment necessarily, just because they were having issues with these overcrowded lounges, issues with the service that they could provide, and so forth. But Delta also bounced back from that kind of quickly, despite all the backlash, despite all these people making these declarations that they would never fly with Delta again, or that they never want to go after earning status with any airline again because it's not worth it. They bounced back quickly. They kind of softened the changes. The changes are still coming, but they softened them. And I think, I don't know, I feel like if they had a chance, it would have been then. And even then, despite those changes, I remember during the earnings call following that announcement, they said they've seen no impact to their sales.
Talk is cheap.
I was going to say a lot of very loud voices on the internet.
Yeah.
So let's wrap up today talking about innovation. What do you think traditional airlines can do to innovate around these loyalty programs? Like what's next? What's coming down the pike to, keep their core fan base, so to speak, happy, keep them engaged, actually do what the plan is intended to do, which is increase loyalty? What do you think is coming for these programs?
I think with those programs, for at least as far as the base goes, I think it's basically the biggest thing is like upping up those requirements, because the base will be able to keep up with those requirements, and then kind of weeding out the others who can't, so then they can get the level of service where they're attended to immediately for customer service if there's a cancellation or a disruption, or they're getting a first class upgrade very easily, and so forth. So I think that will be like definitely one part of it. But I do think if they wanted to really democratize it, they need to give more options for, I think, even just a casual traveler too. I mean, I think like even if you have, let's just say you have maybe like 30K miles and like a Delta account, if you can maybe split that with like some cash or something and get a little discount, I do think that does create loyalty for the airline. And I do think that is something a customer appreciates, is that these miles that they're earning, they can go towards something. It's not like they need to fly every other week for it to really become worth it. United already does some sort of iteration with that, where they let you split your miles and cash, and it has like worked so far for the people who don't have a ton of miles on Mileage Plus. Their executive told me that the growth for that program has been crazy, and it's just gotten so popular. So I think that could be like a good way. I think also there just needs to we need to kind of like reinvent the way that like these programs are advertised. I think a lot of the conventional wisdom that came from the 80s or the 90s just doesn't obviously apply anymore. But you'll have like your parents telling you, oh, like sign up, you'll eventually get to fly on business class or something. And it really doesn't work that way. It's not really that black and white. So I think we need to be more clear about that too.
And with all the social media component too, not only do you have the old stale wisdom, you have the fuel on the fire that is points influencers and travel influencers, right?
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I think it really depends on how devoted you are and your preferences for flying. Because, like, as you were mentioning your Japan flight, like, if you're okay making multiple layovers somewhere so your flight is free and then you get to fly business class, then by all means, like, go ahead and do that. But if you're someone like me where you just want to get there directly and you don't want to be going airport to airport, try to figure out security and everything, and you don't want to deal with that process, like, you're not going to want to do that.
And by the way, I didn't wind up flying business in the end.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So,
There you go. I was going to say, for just that reason, I booked the flight that's best for me on whatever airline.
yeah, I do that too.
Those words are a nightmare for any airline loyalty executive out there to hear. And I think on that note, maybe is where we wrap it up. These are programs that are endlessly fascinating. They are huge, huge, huge drivers of revenue, loyalty, brand loyalty, direct bookings, and also the competitive landscape of pricing and all that stuff is incredibly important for the airlines. And so I'm glad that we could have this conversation. I'm sure we're only just scratching the surface, and we'll have more talks about it. Megna, thanks for coming on it and talking to us about airline loyalty.
And if you haven't read Megna's piece, please go to skift.com and check it out.
It's amazing. You need to go to skift.com and check out Megna's piece on the challenges and the future of airline loyalty. After you've done reading that, don't forget to also like and subscribe to this podcast and 5 stars and all the stuff that we need to let people know about this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, Megna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Megna.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
All right, have a good one, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Skift Travel Podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.